Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our next live stream. I'll be your producer for this session. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenters to answer live. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our speakers for today. Thank you for joining.
Hello. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Today we're going to talk about Fabric Analytics Engineer and how you can get certified. So in this session, it's going to be about an hour. We're going to kind of talk through what you might find on the exam, the topic specifically, some differences maybe between the PL-300 and the DP-600, new concepts that are going to be covered in the exam, and we're going to also share some practical tips for studying if you've never taken one of these exams before. So by the end of our hour, you will have a clear roadmap for what to study and where to focus. So with that, we're going to start with a couple introductions. Yes, indeed. We'll tell you a little bit about ourselves. We would love to hear about you and where you're from too. So we're hoping this is going to be a really interactive session. You'll meet our moderators today as well. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. If you just want to tell us where you are in your journey, we'd love to hear that too. So with that, let's jump in. I will tell you a little bit about myself first. My name is Stephanie Bruno. I am joining you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the US. And so it is a little before lunchtime for me. I am an independent consultant with datawitches.com. So if you'd like to see what I offer, please go ahead to our website and you can learn about what we can do. I'm also a data platform MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer. And now I will turn it over.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I feel like I'm joining from a little bit from the other side of the world. So I'm based in Finland. It is early evening, I would say, here at the moment. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform and Azure MVP. I do a lot of my contributions by going around speaking at events and things like that. And I'm a co-founder and a data architect at quite a fresh new company called Bruvo. We're about a year and a half old. And I'm also one of the, I would say, instructors on this cool platform called Fabric Forge. There's a lot of content around Fabric if any of you are interested to get more in detail after this session, because we do have an hour and there's a lot to cover and we can't cover every single thing that is going to be on that exam for DP-600. But to help us get going on this session as well, we also have some really good moderators for you in the chat. So if you have any questions while we go on, toss your questions in and our moderators will be there to answer your questions. And they have such a huge amount of knowledge to share. So I know they will have no issues in getting back to your questions that arise. So we have Shabnam, who is also a fellow Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and she's a data and AI consultant who focuses on Fabric and Power BI. So specifically a lot of knowledge in relation to this particular exam. And she's the founder of ABI Cube. Then we have Taylor, who is a Fabric community super user. If you are putting your questions in any of the forums, etc., if you're on the Fabric Discord channel or anything like that, you will probably find Taylor there and always willing to help and answer all of your questions. And he's also a robotics nerd as well and leads the data services portfolio for a mineral refinery company. So really interesting context for him. And then we also have Nandan from India, who is also a data platform MVP and a Fabric super user and Azure community champion. And he works as the director of data and AI at Synapse. So there's definitely a lot of knowledge there to share. So keep tossing those questions in as they come along.
Great, thank you. We're so excited to have these fantastic moderators. So if you're joining us live, you're in luck because you'll get all your questions answered. All right, so we're going to have just a few promo slides so that you can learn about some upcoming events that are also going on in addition to this one, and then we'll jump right into the content. So first up, this is part of Fabric Data Days monthly, which is a great opportunity for you to really dive in, learn all the concepts, and really prepare not only for this exam, obviously, but also everything around Fabric. So we've got a nice QR code here for you. You can see the next session is on the 28th. This is a really hot topic here, choosing the right path in Fabric. And always, I love an end-to-end demo. So this is another great opportunity for you. In addition to that, we also have some upcoming sessions, which are recaps of really the most popular kind of big announcement sessions that were given at FabCon in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. So this is a full recap series where you're going to see the actual presentations from these sessions. So from AI to SQL to Power BI, real-time intelligence, it's all there. So again, we've got links, we've got QR codes. You should be able to find these, and they're all really, really great. You're going to learn all about new features, announcements, exciting things that you can work on. And with that, we also need some feedback. If you're new to Fabric or you know someone who is, Microsoft really wants to make the product better for everybody. So if you know anybody or you're just kind of dabbling, you're getting started, they're looking for people who have used Fabric for the first, second, or third time, just to kind of understand the experience and what it's like for a new user. We've all been there, right? So this is the kind of information and the survey, fill out the survey if you might be interested in participating in this. And more opportunities to learn. If you haven't heard about these analysts in a day, or real time in a day, or dashboard in a day, they're really, really fantastic offerings. It's great content. You don't even have to have your own a Fabric account because you get to do all the work on an environment, a virtual machine for yourself, and it's free. I know that I have delivered a few of these. Lots of people have delivered these. It's a great opportunity to kind of get some really hands-on experience. If you haven't had a chance to touch all the areas of the product, maybe because it's not something you're working on, this is a really great opportunity to really get in there, learn how to do it, get your questions answered from some experts as well. So I highly recommend
it's cool
these
to see
in a day.
This. Yeah, I totally agree, and it's cool to see this real-time intelligence addition to the offering as well.
Yeah, for sure. So if you have taken any of these, throw that in the chat. Let us know how it went. Encourage the other people here on the call to also join into these in a days. And now, of course, this is the slide I think everybody really is excited about. This is the one where you can get your DP-600 certification voucher for free. So we will leave this slide up here for about 30 seconds. But in case you missed the QR code or the link here, it will be pinned in the chat also. So if you need to get information on how you can get your voucher, look for the pinned chat, which will have the details. So basically, you need to take any 3 modules on Learn. You have to take them before you request your voucher. You can see there's a code word on here, Lakehouse, which is not case sensitive, so don't worry about that. But you need to take your modules, and if you're eligible, you'll get your voucher within 2 weeks. Not everyone will be eligible, but we can't put all the details for that in the chat here today. So really, this is where you're going to get the information for how you can get that voucher. So I'm talking as long as I can just to make sure that you all have time to get to get the link and the code here. But remember,
Yeah, nice
just
work.
in case you miss it, it's in the chat. All right, now let's get into our actual specific content for what we're going to be talking about today. All right, so today, first of all, if you are here for the exam, that's great, and we're going to help you with that. It's not a total beginner topic, though. One of these sessions isn't going to be quite enough for you to be able to just do this today and then pass the exam. It's not a super easy exam, so it is important to have hands-on experience with Fabric before you try to take this exam. And with what we're going to talk about today, we assume you have already got some Fabric knowledge, so it's not total intro. But we are going to make sure to cover the key topics that you can expect to see on the exam, and then you can continue your prep with some of the resources that we share as well. So what is on this exam? Well, these are kind of the high-level key areas that you need to be comfortable with for this exam. So this is what we're going to focus on. First of all, it's preparing data. Second, it is implementing and managing your semantic models. So here's a little bit of overlap for the PL300, for example. So there are a lot of Power BI concepts on this exam, but then it's also a little bit more broad. So we will also be maintaining our analytics solution in Fabric. So it's Power BI plus all kinds of other goodies in Fabric that we're going to cover. And just remember, we're here to have an interactive session. So you're here to get your questions answered, and we're here to answer them for you. So remember, we have these 3 great moderators. They're going to be able to answer these questions. I mean, maybe not the big life questions or anything, but specific Fabric questions, feel free to ask about. And also, I want to make sure that in case you have never taken one of these exams before, that you kind of get prepared today with what to expect just on exam day. So we'll also share some tips and tricks. And I know the moderators have their own tips and tricks as well. So please do ask your questions, say hi, tell us where you are on your journey, and we are here to help you.
All right. With that, if we look at the description of the DP-600 exam, it is aimed at the role of analytics engineer. And like in the old world before Fabric, that would have meant a lot of Power BI work. But now, since we are in the context of Fabric, having this full-on analytics or data platform solution available to us, it also includes some additional things. So I think that's also important. We have this analytics engineer, data analyst approach to this whole topic. And as was already mentioned by Stephanie, kind of the core topics that we're discussing are maintaining those data analytics solutions, preparing the data, and then semantic models is a large area of this certification as well. And from my point of view, I come more from the data engineering background. So for me, coming into this exam, I found this a little harder than the DP-700, just because I don't have the same amount of hands-on real-life experience on the nitty-gritty details of semantic models. So I myself found that area a little more challenging than the more generally to Fabric-related areas of the exam. How was it for you, Stephanie?
Well, this is great. So I think this is why we make a great pair today, because I come more from the Power BI semantic modeling background. So I found the DP-700 much more challenging for me than the 600. So, we've all got our experience and what we are the most comfortable with. But what I love about this is, it really kind of forces us to broaden our knowledge a little bit. And then,
exactly.
You learn something new and you're like, well, that's cool. Now I can use that in my life as well. So yeah, from the other side is the way I came in.
Yeah, that's really cool that we can kind of have a very different approach to the topic as well. And of course, when you start to dive into the areas a little more in detail, this does not go into very detail either, this particular slide, but we get a little more information about what is contained in the exam. So also when you're looking through the requirements of the exam, the study guide of what is included, what you can do is kind of look through the list and identify which areas do you already know thoroughly, maybe some things that you are doing daily in your work, and you don't need to focus so much on those areas. And instead, you can kind of focus on the areas where you feel like you have some gaps and you need to fill in. So from the maintaining a data analytics solution perspective, we'll talk today about a little bit about the implementing security and governance topic, and then also maintaining the analytics development lifecycle. But it will be very much like scratching the surface today with only such a short amount of time available. Then we'll talk a little bit about the preparing data portion. So we'll talk about getting the data, transforming the data, and querying and analyzing data. So this is particularly where we start to get a whole another set of tools to use compared to the PL300 exam and the Power BI world. So for example, we will look into the pipelines, Dataflows Gen 2, even Spark a little bit, and even using like SQL, KQL, and DAX in the context of the entirety of Fabric. And then we have the implement and manage semantic models section, where we then look at how you design and build semantic models and how you optimize those for enterprise scale as well. And of course, in the Fabric context, we have new concepts there, not just like using the import mode and DirectQuery, but also we have the concept of DirectLake that relates very much to Fabric. So there's like new aspects that come in from that perspective.
And before you jump ahead, make sure to, this is my first really important tip, make a note of that link on the bottom, the DP-600 study guide. For every exam, there's one of these study guides, and it's really, really helpful. This is the link I always go to for any exam because it's going to show you exactly the detailed breakdown like you see here on the left, but it also has other resources. And it has, I think this is where you'll find the, it's not called the sample exam, but you can take a sort of version of the exam. So you can kind of experience what the questions will be like as well. So this link here, and if you lose the link, just look up DP-600 study guide.
Yeah.
And then my second tip is that Shabnam in our chat here, she has put together on her GitHub page a DP-600 test prep tracker that you can download, and then you can kind of go through and you can kind of grade yourself on the different areas. And that will help give you an idea of what areas you might need to focus more on. So Shabnam, hopefully you can put that in the chat for people to be able
that's
to
really cool.
Yeah, I think she did it for the DP-700 too, but I could be wrong.
Excellent tips. So as we're starting to get more into the topic, we of course first need to like an overview of understand what is Fabric and what it is for. This will be a very quick breeze through this time. So as said, we are kind of expecting that you have some Fabric knowledge from before. So this picture is interesting because it has evolved a lot over time, and I think we will see it evolving a lot in the future as well. But I think kind of the main takeaway from this picture is that within Fabric, we have the unified platform, which means that we have these unified capabilities there. Of course, there is AI nowadays as one aspect, but then we have OneLake for data and having the data available within the different parts of Fabric in a seamless way. But we also have governance aspects, like meaning handling how people have access to things within Fabric and how do we configure security and things like that. We can do a lot of things at the tenant level within our organization to manage that Fabric environment that we are using. And then on top of those platform features, we have like different capabilities that we can use that contain many, many different actually technical solutions. So even though Fabric is a single platform, there are a lot of different like technical solutions that we can use within it that require different kinds of skills. And for this particular exam, where we are covering some aspects from the data factory side, so pipelines, for example, and data flows fall in that area. We are using some aspects from the analytics side, and then a little bit touching the real-time intelligence side, and then Power BI is, of course, a very important aspect here as well. But kind of having this idea in your head that you have the unified platform where you have some like single ways of doing things, but then you have also these components that you can pick and choose to build your actual solution within Fabric.
Okay, so let's talk specifically about that first area that we expect to see on the exam, which is the preparing data in Fabric. In Power BI, if you've come from that route, like me, most of your prep happens in Power Query and the data model, usually for a single report. But in Fabric, while you're still going to do the same things, you're going to do it more at scale. So you'll prepare data once so that it can be reused by lots of teams and different models and different reports, rather than what we frequently do in Power BI, where we're just doing it in Power Query just for that model. So now we're going to break this down into the 3 steps of getting, transforming, and then querying. So let's start with the getting. So in Power BI, again, if you're coming from that route, you're probably used to maybe connecting with Power Query to some Excel files, maybe a SQL database, some web sources. There's tons of sources you can connect with. But Fabric adds a little bit more scale and flexibility. We can ingest from dozens of sources. We can do batch or streaming, and we can put this data into OneLake. So instead of having our data imported into a model just in Power BI, if we put it in OneLake, we can access it with lots of different tools. So how do we do that? Well, we have a few tools at our disposal to do that. We've got Dataflows Gen 2, and these are super comfortable for those of us who love Power Query and came from doing a lot of work in desktop. Dataflows Gen 2 are great. We've also got Spark notebooks, which let us prepare and transform data before it's modeled. And I'm sure Haney prefers those.
That's
She
my
loves
favorite.
Spark notebooks. Yep. Right. So if you come from the engineering background, then you'll be happy to know that you can do your data prep in a notebook. And then we also have Data Factory pipelines. This is going to let us automate some of these data flows. We can do the orchestration with these. We may not do as much transformation with the pipeline. We're going to save that for our data flows and our notebooks. But these all work together, which is really helpful. And then we also have shortcuts. Shortcuts allow us to just have one copy of our data in OneLake rather than, oh, I need it over in this other workspace, so now I have to make a copy of it. I don't have to do that. I can just point to it. So the idea is we just want to have one ingestion process that can feed multiple reports, models, etc. No more copy and paste or one-off data sets if we can avoid it. So that's kind of what we can use to get our data here. And then we still need to transform and explore it, right? So just like we do in Power BI. So we get the data, we connect to it. It's time to do a little bit of transformation. And again, usually from Power BI, that's going to happen in Power Query. But now we have a lot of choice. So now in Fabric, we might want to do our transformations a little bit before the data reaches the model. If we do that, then it can be reused by everyone in our organization, even people who don't want to use it in Power BI. Maybe you've got some data scientists and they also like the notebooks, for example. So we can use the tools in Fabric to then put the data, we can serve it up to our colleagues in the way that they want to use it. So we can do everything we already know. We can do joins, filters, aggregations, but we can do this in different ways. We can do it in a data flow. We can do it in a pipeline. We can do it with SQL, because a lot of us love that, as well as notebooks. So we can now centralize and govern these transformations, so it's not really that kind of hidden black box that we used to have a little more frequently in our Power BI files. So everyone can work off of the same kind of trusted data. So now let's go into a little bit more detail of these. Did you have something to add, Haney?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the huge benefit of having this kind of unified platform available, that we don't just have like everybody who is using the similar data does their transformations a little differently, but we actually have just one version of that. So that's really what brings the benefit as well.
Yeah, and I know change can be scary. I know that I love my Power BI desktop and I want to keep doing my transformations there. But what I really like about this is I can keep what I love. I can just kind of expand it and open it up to other people by doing that work in Fabric instead of my own little Power BI desktop file. So it makes it easy to transition. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about Dataflows Gen 2. So again, super familiar for Power BI users because it is Power Query. It's just that it's scaled for the organization. We can clean and shape our data once. And in case you have not played with Dataflows Gen 2 yet, one of the really magical pieces with it is once you finish all of your transformations, now you can tell it where to put the data. So instead of that data, again, just living in your semantic model, I can say, actually, I want all my transform data to now go live in a lake house or in a warehouse, wherever I want it so that I can make it available to other people. So this is part of that whole kind of centralization and governance so that we can have a little bit of visibility into that. And then we have our single copy of this perfect, beautiful data. We can schedule refreshes, we can do incremental loads, everything is reusable. And that magical data destination is really kind of the next level piece for Dataflows Gen 2. All right, and next one is back to you, Haney.
Yes, thank you. So in addition to the data flows option, we have also the pipelines that are familiar from if you've been working with Data Factory in Azure previously, for example, or even pipelines within Synapse. But it's good to remember they're not exactly the same. Some things work a little differently. But the idea is the same. With pipelines, we can orchestrate that ingestion and transformation across sources. And when we create a pipeline, we put in different activities. So this particular screenshot has a copy data activity. It has this activity to do something if it fails. And then there is a notebook activity as well. So we can essentially bring different actions that we want to take in our pipeline into one pipeline, then link them together. And that way we kind of get that progression of what needs to happen step by step. And in real world scenarios, these can, of course, become very, very complex with several different steps and branches that different things happen if things fail and other things happen if things succeed. But they're a powerful tool to really orchestrate those processes. And for example, as one activity here, you could also have Dataflows Gen 2 as well as one step. So with these, we're able to automate batch and streaming workflows. And then also when we are processing the data, especially if we are using the copy data activity, we can have sinks and sources using lakehouses and warehouses and things within Fabric. But we have a lot of connectors also to external data sources and destinations as well. And then, of course, these pipelines could be reusable across different needs if we need that. And then we have this built-in monitoring, logging, and error handling built in. So we have monitoring views to see when our pipeline is running, why it has failed, so we can dive into the failed pipeline and click through and find out where is the different failure. And this, of course, scales beyond single report refreshes, so we can have definitely multiple ones in here. And I think especially from the analyst perspective, something really useful that you can do from the pipeline nowadays is that you can refresh semantic models so that it gets refreshed right after your data has been loaded in. So you can kind of get from the very beginning of your data pipeline to the point that you refresh that semantic model. And if you happen to be using lakehouses and you need to ensure that the SQL endpoint of the lakehouse is refreshed as well, there is now an activity to refresh that as well. So those are maybe some highlights of things that you might come across like you want to use for your scenarios. And yeah, I mentioned some of these like core components. So activities, you create data transformations with them and you also control flow with them. And then you are also able to have some parameters in the pipeline. So that is one of the ways that you can make pipelines very like reusable, and you don't have to have them for only like a single scenario. And then you trigger these when you want to run a specific pipeline. But then, of course, to my favorite part personally, so we have the Spark notebooks or the notebooks available in general. They are not only in relation to Spark anymore, but they definitely come from the Spark world originally very much. So the notebooks is where you can just write anything your heart desires with code. And we have Python available, but also R, SQL, or Spark in the context of having PySpark or Spark SQL available as well. And with those, you can do really advanced transformations, and essentially you can do anything you need to do because you have code. But of course, it requires that you have that knowledge of being able to write the specific language of code that you want to use.
Or you can be like me and use our friend Copilot.
Oh, yes, yeah. That's true. That's where really these AI tools are very useful, and they can help you get the code out, help you write what you need. And of course, notebooks are really good for large data sets and complex calculations, but even there you have like a variety. For example, the Spark flavors scale more to like large data sets and are very meant for that parallel processing, and it's able to handle data in that way, whereas Python works just as well for smaller data sets on the other hand. So you have a scale of like how good support there is for different levels and sizes of data. And the same way, we are able to support not only like data processing in our pipelines, but we can also do like exploration and experimentation on our data and even testing for our data before we go to the modeling stage. And there is the integration for lakehouses and warehouses built in as well. So you can link which data sources within Fabric you want to use in your notebooks.
And that is
And these
huge.
definitely,
It's always a pain, right? Like trying to make
yeah,
those connections has always been a hassle. So that the notebooks in Fabric make it really easy.
exactly. I totally agree. And it's just, I find it like a nice way to write code because you have like separate cells that you can run individually. So it can be a little bit of a shift if you're used to just, writing code outside of a notebook. But even for running something like SQL, it can be useful because you can have like those separate blocks and have a little bit of documentation for them in between as well. And these definitely are something that can complement the data flows for having that enterprise scale data engineering. And in some cases, something might be easier to do with notebooks and other things might be easier to do with data flows. And you should always, of course, consider also your team skills in terms of like how much resources do you have to do monitoring and upkeep of code and things like that. And there are like different areas you should consider when you are choosing what kind of tools you are using. And then lastly, we should be able to also for this exam query and analyze data. So we should be able to use all of the different tools available to some extent. We don't have to have like deep knowledge of every single one of them, but it's helpful that you have a little bit of experience with writing SQL queries, writing KQL queries, and DAX, and also doing notebooks. And for KQL, I would give a hint to just like play around with it a little bit and get familiar with the syntax. The logic is a little different than SQL, but once you get a grasp of it, it's quite easy to actually understand. It's just a little different approach than the SQL world. And of course, when you're doing queries and using these different languages, again, you can test transformations and validate the data at scale and ensure that you have like right amounts of data, right amount of rows. Do you have some missing values and things like that? Those are all that you can do using these methods. You are also able to do that same kind of like ad hoc analysis on your data when you're not quite sure yet how you need to model your data. You can use querying to actually figure out like what is the right way to combine these data sets, for example. And then, of course, these also support multiple downstream uses and enterprise analytics as well. So essentially, like we have the different SQL endpoints. We have the warehouse and the SQL endpoint in Lakehouse, and we can connect to those from our semantic models, for example, to be able to use them again downstream in our reporting solutions. All right. With that, we're changing to the next section here.
All right, yeah, so now we'll jump into section 2 of our 3 areas that we're covering. So this one is semantic modeling. So this is where my heart is. So semantic models in Fabric are more than just Power BI data sets. So they can serve multiple workloads like reports, notebooks, and pipelines. You can even write DAX in a notebook to query a semantic model. So one thing that always is kind of makes my head swirl is there is not just one way to do anything in Fabric. There are usually a lot of different ways, and it can be hard to choose to know what to use when. So, like Haney said, it's a lot about your team skills. So whatever they prefer. Or what their comfort zone is, so don't get overwhelmed with like, oh, I need to do this, so I have to know the right way to do it, because there can be multiple ways. So
Yeah,
same thing with the semantic models. Yeah, right? So our semantic models in Fabric are, again, they're just like Power BI, but more. So this approach allows us to build these kind of governed, reusable data products that can power more than just a report. That's really an important concept. However, don't get overwhelmed because it's also just kind of what we're used to from before. But now we're designing for scalability. So in this context, it refers to making these data models that can handle growth in the volume of data. We might ingest, a few rows of data in our model or thousands, and it performs just fine. But then when we start ingesting a lot more data, we can find that things slow down. So we really have to still make sure we're following semantic modeling best practices with what we're doing just to accommodate that scale. So it has to be at the forefront. We need flexibility because our models are going to change. We know when we make a model, it's not done. So we can do this in Fabric. Data growth. The models have to be able to handle more and more data with an acceptable performance. And then at the same time, we want to reduce complexity. So if we build our models with scalability in mind, they will be less complex and easier to manage. That is the goal. Always, right? So let's continue. Let's talk about storage modes in Fabric. So we are familiar from Power BI land with generally import mode and DirectQuery mode. I would always default to import mode whenever I could, just because it's simpler and performance is generally better for our end users. The downside with import, though, of course, is that it requires data refreshes and we're pulling in a copy of our data. So that's why sometimes we would prefer to use DirectQuery. If the data was too big, for example, to fit in memory in import mode, then we would have to use DirectQuery. It also doesn't require refreshes. So if you need your data, practically real time, then DirectQuery was the way to go. But now with Fabric, we've got Direct Lake mode, which is really wonderful. It's kind of, I always say the best of both worlds, but I don't mean to say that because I don't want you to consider not using import or DirectQuery anymore. Sometimes there's still a case for those as well. But with Direct Lake, it's really great because when our data lives in OneLake, then we get that kind of speed and not having to do speed of import. We get great performance, but we don't have to do refreshes like in DirectQuery. So it really is great because it has these features of both that we love. So with Direct Lake, our data is in OneLake and it's in this special format called Delta Parquet that the analysis services engine can query really, really fast. And that's why it generally performs faster than DirectQuery. This is all important because there are still some caveats, right? So there are still some limits with how much data you can have. If you have more data in your OneLake that you're connecting to with Direct Lake than your capacity can handle, then it's going to fall back to DirectQuery. And this is okay, right? It's not necessarily the kiss of death or anything, but it's just some considerations to keep in mind. These are the kind of things that are important for you to know as you're learning about the import modes and you're learning about Direct Lake, particularly for the DP-600. All right, and then next step is we still need to optimize. So like I said, just because we can have our data in OneLake and it can be very, very fast, that's not really a get out of jail free card to let you forget about semantic modeling best practices. So we still do need to make sure that we're designing our models well. The old rules still apply because you want your end users to enjoy their reports, right? You don't want them to click on something and see that little spinning wheel forever because the model is not well designed. So still very, very important to learn all about the star schema and learn about those best practices. There's some really good documentation on just things to keep in mind for performance, and those do still definitely apply for Direct Lake. So if you thought that Fabric was going to let you, gloss over good semantic modeling, unfortunately, no. So you still need to have that good model. And actually, I would say it's even more important than ever now with AI and Copilot, because if we want AI to be able to make sense of our model has to make sense. So I'll just throw that out as a little bonus there. All right.
Do you have like a highlight of what is like the most common mistake you see with building semantic models? Something one should keep in mind.
I think pulling in all the columns in your data because somebody might want it someday. That is a great way to really slow down your model, honestly. So for example, if you have in your fact table a key that has a unique number for every single row, but you're not joining that to anything with a relationship, all it's doing is hogging up space. So pulling in
Very
more
true.
columns than you need is it's a path you don't want to go down.
A very excellent highlight. Thank you.
Right.
Wonderful. Then we actually get to the last section that we're going to be covering today, which is maintaining an analytics solution. And this does also cover some really important aspects because we are moving to this world where we have like this full-on data platform that we are working on with Fabric. It means that we're not just managing like a single semantic model or a handful of semantic models and reports. It means that we're probably managing kind of the flow of data through from the very beginning all the way to the report. So we need to understand a little bit about the structure of Fabric and how we handle different things within Fabric. And one of these aspects is, of course, data security in Fabric and how do we handle access for different users. And to understand that, we have to take a little bit of a step back and understand the structure of Fabric and how do we structure different items that we are creating there. And so we have this idea of having workspaces within Fabric, which might be very familiar to you also from the Power BI world. It is the same idea. Every item you create in Fabric is created within a workspace. So when we are planning our Fabric environment, we want to think about how do we structure the workspaces and which items belong in which workspaces. And so when we're talking about the data security aspect of that, we have to think about what kind of roles are we giving to people to our workspaces. So this is where we control who can view, edit, and manage all of the items that are there within a single workspace. So if you use a workspace level role, it of course means that you cannot not give access to a specific item in that workspace. It is all or nothing type of permission that you then grant to your users. But you're also able to give permissions at an item level. So let's say you have like a notebook and a semantic model and this picture has a warehouse in it. So let's say you have those three items. You can also specifically go into a single item and share that particular item with a user. So that way you are not giving access to the full workspace, but you are giving access to a single item. And I would say that it is, of course, always easier to manage when you are granting access from the workspace level because you don't need to remember to go into every single item and give the correct permissions everywhere. And this will become easier to manage if you use security groups that are kind of designed per role so that you are able to then just assign the groups and not actually single users. And you then in the future, you just add users to those particular groups. So workspace level is always easier, but then in some cases, you of course have to think about what is the least level of permissions that a person needs. So sometimes you might need to also go to the item permission level. There are also actually compute or granular level permissions that you can give that apply to a specific engine specifically. So for example, to a SQL endpoint or a semantic model, and that way you can give more detailed control. So that means that for a semantic model, you, for example, have read permissions, but you also have build permissions that are very particular to a semantic model specifically. And in the SQL endpoint, you have also different options of how you share that. So this is what this is pointing at. And then we also have the OneLake data access controls or the OneLake security. This name has been changing over time a little bit. And this is where you are able to give the access actually at the OneLake level and not at the different engine levels or at the different items levels or so. You go to actually a file and folder level and you give the permissions directly in the OneLake based on your role-based access controls. And that way, then that is kind of whatever engine you are using to access that data, it would take into account what has been configured at the OneLake level. So it kind of helps that you can think of these different layers. You have the OneLake level where you can configure access. You have the specific compute level permissions that you can configure. You can share specific items, like individually, or you can give workspace level roles that give you access to the entire workspace that you give the access to. So even access control isn't just, one place, though I think we're going towards that way with the access at the OneLake level, where then that is kind of respected wherever you might be working within Fabric from that portion. But we have to think about these in different layers at the moment. And we also need to think about the security at the semantic model level. So that is also another aspect. Kind of some best practices that you can follow is that when you have like a well-defined semantic models, and maybe you have also some semantic models that are reusable across your organization, and you have well-defined roles of who can access what, then it is easier to manage those permissions that you might give at the semantic model level. Then you're also able to use dynamic rules to reduce the role count that you might require. And then if you go to really filtering and row level security and things like that, and you are filtering different tables, then it can be very helpful to have the filtering at the dimensional table level and not at the fact table level. And that way, kind of then when you have those tables joined correctly, the filtering applies across correctly when you are doing that. Of course, you need to validate the model design and relationships. That's very, very important. And then when you are testing out the row level security, for example, there's kind of this practice to use the user principal name instead of the user name when you are testing those out. So that way you are kind of getting the correct form of who is the user that you are testing as. And make sure that you match the credentials between the desktop and service. So this goes very specifically into the semantic model security side and goes quite into the specifics. And this is kind of pointing at a very important aspect that these are also covered in the exam, kind of the specifics of security at the semantic model level. And as the very last section of this portion of the topic, we are looking very briefly at the development lifecycle. I will say that this is more complex than it looks on the slide, and there is quite many considerations that we need to take in real life. But just to kind of cover the basics here today is that we often use version control to track and manage the changes that we make in our workspaces. And then we integrate our Fabric workspace to some kind of version control system that is based on Git. So Azure DevOps and GitHub are currently the supported options, and you can link your workspace to a repository in one of those. And that way you can have your items represented as code there when you're working with them. Then we have deployment pipelines, and these are what help us get our changes that we have done in, for example, a dev environment. Then you could use a deployment pipeline to take those changes from development to test, and then to test to production environment, with kind of having that ability to choose which changes are you taking, ensuring that they actually go through, and having that governance and consistency in place. And luckily, the deployment pipelines do quite a good job in, understanding that if you have something pointing to another item in your dev workspace, then it will link the same items in your test workspace once the deployment is done. And the same thing when you go to production. Then oftentimes we want to do some testing and validation. So we might build some processes for being able to verify data accuracy, model integrity, and security before we go into production. Those might be something that we need to ensure that our data is handled correctly. Then we actually have within Fabric quite many ways to monitor things. So we are able to monitor things that are running at the moment. That is kind of the monitor tab that we have available in the Fabric UI. But then if we want to monitor the capacity itself, how much is it being used, then we would need to set up capacity metrics app. And then we also have some of the admin monitoring reports available now as well, kind of built in for you. And then in some cases, you might need some custom additions to that, or you could also use the Fabric Unified monitoring solution that is out there, the FUAM. I could not remember the abbreviation on the fly.
I think you got it.
You have, yeah, I think so too now. So you can kind of use those different tools to ensure that you have the visibility to everything running in your environment that you actually require. And then for automation, we are able to use also like external tools to call the different APIs that we have available in Fabric. That allows us to also build like custom CI/CD processes within Azure DevOps or GitHub and use the deployment options there as well from outside of Fabric. And then we also can use service principals to do those deployments as well, or do some automation for our environment. But as you could maybe tell, this is quite high level today, but there's quite a bit of detail that goes into these, and you can check again the study guide for more detail, like what particular things are covered in the exam itself.
Excellent shout out for the study guide. Yeah, remember to go back to that study guide.
Exactly. All right, I think this is for you, Stephanie.
Yeah. Okay. So we just want to make sure that we help you prepare not only with the content on the exam, but also just what to expect. So you can request your voucher, you can schedule your exam. Again, you can take practice tests. That was the word I was looking for earlier. You
Yes.
can take practice tests. Definitely look out to the community for the resources that they have built. Like I mentioned Shabnam's earlier, there are all kinds of great blog posts on preparing for these exams. Just a quick highlight, if you have not taken one before, you need 700 points to pass, which is not the same as 70%. So you can think about that like in the real world, you don't have to know everything to do your job, right? You know a lot of it. You've got a lot of experience with certain parts of it. But it's totally okay if you have to do something out of your comfort zone to go look it up, right? And ask people that you know. So the exam is the same. You don't need to get every single question right on it to pass the exam. And you can also even use the Microsoft Learn website during the exam, which sounds super exciting at first, but I've talked to so many people that have said, I think you included, right, Haney? You said that you almost
Yes.
ran out of time once because you were using Learn so much. And then the thing that I discovered while trying to use Learn in the exam is that you can't use Control F to search for a word on the page. So that's what I do in my normal life, right? But I couldn't do that while taking an exam. So my big recommendation, if you plan on using Learn while taking the exam, is to practice using Learn without doing a web search for the topic that you're looking for. You need to be able to navigate through Learn itself and on the page. Some of those pages are really long, and if you can't use Control F, you could run out of time. So those are some really important tips for how you can use these. But do you have any other suggestions or any other tips, Haney?
Yeah, the one thing for like taking the exam itself, always read thoroughly like the instructions. There are often some sections where you cannot go back after you've completed them, so pay note of that. But otherwise, when you have sections where you can there's like a box for reviewing later each of the questions. So when you see that, then you oftentimes have the possibility to come back and actually review your answers. So my personal strategy is always to go through the questions once. Anything I don't know off the bat of my head, I click for review. Anything I'm unsure of, I click for review. Anything I know for sure, I don't click for review. And that's kind of also relates to the Microsoft Learn usage, because like when that came available for the first time and I did my exam, I kind of started to doubt myself and double checking even things I actually know. So just, trust yourself. The things that you know. So leave them alone. Don't go through Microsoft Learn using your time for that. And one of the like efficient ways to figure out where do you want to use your time for Microsoft Learn is to check some of those questions for review later, and then come back to them once you've gone through the questions once. And then you can kind of very like pointedly use Microsoft Learn for the aspects that you actually need and not get lost trying to check everything from there, because time-wise, it's not possible.
Yeah, that's a great tip for sure. Other things I would say, if you haven't had a chance to get hands-on, that is really important. Just going through well, let me back up. Going through the Microsoft Learn modules is really helpful. Definitely do that. But I will say it's not enough to pass the exam. So you can do the learn modules, you'll learn a ton, but you still do have to have some practice getting in there and doing things. So do both. Do the Microsoft Learn modules, also get hands-on. How do you get hands-on? Well, hopefully, wherever you work, your organization has allowed you to do a Fabric trial. If so, that's fantastic. You can build your own projects. If not, remember about those in-a-days. So go to that in-a-day link, because even if you can't get your own trial, you can at least work on the in-a-day in the environment. But you definitely want to have some hands-on time with Fabric.
Yeah.
Any other
There's actually
tips
a
before
question in the chat regarding like the questions in the exam. So how best to tackle scenario-based questions in the exam. And that's, I think, a great highlight, because there can be these scenario-based questions in the exam. So you're like presented a situation where you often have like multiple tabs of text in relation to different things. And then you have a few questions that relate to the same scenario. And I've heard people have different strategies for this. For me, it's I read the questions through briefly first, and then I look at the text. And then I go back and forth between the question and finding my answer. So that's how I personally approach it. How about you?
I used to read everything first and then go to the question, but then I saw online somewhere someone suggested your route, and I found that really helpful, because it helps you know what to look for in the scenario. So yeah, skim through the questions first, then come back. So I love that tip. That helped me a lot.
Yeah, excellent. And there's you mentioned already the practice exam, but there's like also like I don't remember what it's called, but oftentimes on the exam page, you have like the lab environment of the exam, where you have a little bit of like nonsense questions, but you actually see how the exam flows. So if you've never taken a Microsoft exam before, I really recommend just clicking through that, even though the questions are silly, but you can kind of get the sense of how the exam itself flows.
Yeah, exactly. I think they call it the sandbox. So you'll probably see a link for the sandbox on the study guide, right? Always go back to the study guide.
Exactly. Wonderful. With that, we've actually come to the end of the content today, and we are swiftly running out of time as well. So we'll just recap quickly here some of the resources that were mentioned in the beginning. If you need to catch some of the codes again, we'll go through them briefly. Most important, of course, get your free voucher to getting certified. That is the most important thing after this session. Oftentimes, it's also helpful to schedule the exam. Then you have some positive time pressure for yourself to get prepared for that. And Code Word Lakehouse, make sure to check the requirements for eligibility as well when you go to this particular link. And if you still miss getting the QR code or the link, you can still find the pinned message in the chat for a little bit, I believe. And also remember, this is part of a monthly series. So next session will be on April 28th. So this is the integration blueprint, and with an end-to-end demo, which is always really, really exciting. And then this FabCon, SQLCon recap series is also continuing. So there's some of these sessions have already been previously, but some are still left. So you can still join the 3 last ones that are available. And I believe these can be also watched on demand if you need to. Also, a reminder of the feedback as well, that there is this opportunity to be able to give feedback to actually like the people building Fabric, which is always really cool that you are able to do that. Oh, what happened? There we go. So that brings us to the end of this particular session. It was a lot of stuff in 1 hour, so I hope you were able to pull something new for you that will help you prepare for the exam more efficiently in the future. And any last words, encouragement, or something to the listeners?
Thank you so much, everyone, and good luck with the exam.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. This session is part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one.